In emergencies, you have to think quickly. When someone collapses from cardiac arrest, your priority is chest compressions to keep their brain supplied with oxygen until help arrives to restart their heart. You stop the bleeding before worrying about broken bones. I sat on my porch, completely lost about where to even begin. This was unfamiliar territory, and I felt blindsided. As a trauma nurse, I've sharpened my ability to spot subtle signs of a patient's decline and take action. I've saved lives countless times. But somehow, I missed all the warning signs of my 18-year marriage crumbling. Only this time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to save it. After some thought, I didn't want to drag any innocent people into the crossfire, but I was ready to go after my cheating wife and her lover. I took a swig of beer, mulling over my options. The backyard stretched out behind me, sloping gently toward the creek. A few trees dotted the edge of the property. My house, a classic colonial with all the modern upgrades, was a gift from my dad and grandfather when I got engaged. The land had been in our family for generations, and my family's construction company built the house. Instead of joining the business, I chose nursing, a decision that took my dad some time to accept. I could still afford a few luxuries, like my fishing boat and camping gear. We took family trips when we could. Family always came first for me. Now that was all at risk. I glanced toward the house next door. My sister Kate lived there in an identical home. I called her over. We had to talk. "Isn't it a little early for a drink, Jake?" "It's only 2 p.m., Kate said, noticing the beer in my hand. "Weekend off." "In the mood," I replied with a shrug. She knew my work schedule allowed for a lot of time off, and I kept a cooler nearby to avoid trips to the kitchen. I offered her one, and she sat down. "So, what's so urgent?" Kate asked. "You said not to call anyone until I talked to you." "I just found out Sarah's cheating on me," I said, my voice trembling a little. "Are you sure?" "Maybe it's some kind of prank," she asked, looking concerned. I nodded. "There was a video?" "No question." "Who sent it?" Kate asked. "I have no idea," I replied, shaking my head. "The email just said, 'You should know your wife's cheating.' Here's proof." The sender was anonymous, using some username like Angry999. Kate's face turned red with anger. "That unfaithful. Doesn't she know you'll tear her and her lover apart? Do you know who the guy is?" I nodded, but before I could answer, she cut me off. "If Josh ever cheated on me, I'd lose it. How did Sarah even find time for an affair? She's always home except for those girls' nights she goes to." Kate paused, studying my expression. Her eyes widened as she put the pieces together. "No way," she gasped. "Is she cheating with my husband?" I gave a slow nod. Kate's face turned pale, and tears welled up in her eyes. "I wanted to break it to you gently," I said, pulling her in for a hug. "I've had a couple hours to calm down, enough to not do something stupid." She sobbed quietly but quickly composed herself. "I can't believe this. What do we do? Confront them tonight?" "We have to be smart," I said. "Act normal tonight, just like any other day. We'll meet them with a smile and a kiss." Kate frowned. "You've got to be kidding me. We need a plan." "We'll get a lawyer tomorrow," I said, trying to keep things logical. "At least we're lucky we haven't caught anything." I smirked, trying to lighten the mood. "Ugh, don't even joke about that," she said, tossing her empty can into the recycling bin. "And for the record, Josh is not getting any from me. My period just started, so there's no way anything's happening tonight. Let Sarah have him." We both laughed, trying to ease the tension. But Kate quickly turned serious again. "We can't let the kids find out yet," I warned. "They're over at Mom and Dad's for the weekend. They left this morning without a fuss." My mind wandered to my son, Alex, who was 17, and my twin daughters, Mia and Haley, both 16. They spent the summer together with Kate's kids, Luke and Emma, who were the same age. They were more like siblings than cousins, especially after the pandemic forced us all closer. Josh had always been a good father and uncle, helping with schoolwork and staying involved in their lives. I took charge of the outdoor adventures, camping, fishing, hunting, teaching the kids everything I knew. We used to camp in the backyard before moving deeper into the woods as they grew older. 3 weeks ago, I rearranged my schedule and took the kids out for a 6-day fishing trip. Kate and I split up. She took the girls in one boat, and I took the boys in another. We navigated through shallow waters, stopping to let the kids practice steering. I thought that trip had brought us closer as a family. But clearly, family didn't mean as much to Sarah and Josh. The idea of telling the kids that their mom and their uncle were having an affair was soul-crushing. Family was everything to me. I told Kate as much. "We can't hide this from them forever," she said softly, "but we can hold off a little longer. I'll make sure they don't suspect anything." I nodded. "But I can't forgive or forget this. I don't care what Sarah says." Kate sighed. "I agree. I can handle a lot of things, but not this. We need to figure out how to cut ties without losing everything." "Yeah, and without landing ourselves in jail," I added grimly. "And I'm not letting Sarah take the kids away." Kate nodded, her jaw clenched. Josh might have lost me for good. I cracked open another beer, trying to focus. "I get it," I said. "We need to ruin him financially. I'll take every penny I can. Child support, alimony, the works." Kate nodded. "Josh makes more money than Sarah, so I've got a better shot. But you? Sarah might drive you into the ground if the courts side with her. You know how they can be when it comes to women in divorce cases. In my job as a nurse, I didn't deal with legalities, but I knew enough to say our assets were protected." "Our houses are safe," Kate said. "Dad gave them to us before we got married, so they can't touch them. Sarah might try to stick around until the kids are older, but she can't claim the house. And don't forget," I added, "Sarah and I signed a prenup. Dad had insisted on it. If either of us cheated, they'd only get 20% of our shared assets, and no alimony." Sarah's dad, a wealthy surgeon, had demanded it too, worried I'd try to take half his money if things went south after we got pregnant. Kate and Josh signed a similar agreement, thanks to Dad's insistence. "I'm still thinking about that video," Kate said, biting her lip. "Who filmed it?" "There were at least 3 different cameras from multiple angles." "Exactly," I said. "The video I got shows them from all sides, but it doesn't look like it was edited." "And Sarah and Josh? They didn't seem to know they were being recorded." Kate insisted on seeing it, so I pulled out my tablet. She watched in stunned silence before blurting, "Oh my God." Their smug conversation about how clueless Kate and I were made her blood boil. "Josh is done, but we need to figure out who recorded this. I don't want it coming back to bite us." "I don't care if the world sees it," I replied, "as long as it doesn't harm us or the kids." We decided to keep our reactions private for now. Kate sat quietly, thinking it all over, but soon tears filled her eyes, and we both broke down, crying together for the first time since we'd found out. That night, when Sarah got home, I greeted her like nothing was wrong, hugging and kissing her. I half expected her to pull away, but she leaned in and kissed me back like it was just another night. Despite my anger, I told her dinner was ready. Kate and I had already planned for takeout. Neither of us was in the mood to cook. We even joked earlier about poisoning them, but of course, that was just our way of venting. The next morning, I watched Sarah climb into Josh's car as usual. I called Kate. "How'd it go?" I asked. "No problem," she replied. "Joking around helped me keep it together. Any idea where they're headed tonight?" "Not yet, but I'll find out," Kate said. She needed to vent, and we both had to be honest about our anger. By 10 a.m., we were sitting in the office of Kate's boss, Carl, a divorce attorney and an old friend of the family. He agreed to take on our case. "You're sure you have video evidence?" Carl asked. We nodded. We hadn't shown it to him yet, but he trusted us. "As long as you have proof of the infidelity, you're in good shape. Those prenups your dad made you sign are rock solid." "Jake, did you get a lawyer to review yours before signing?" I explained that Dad had insisted, and Kate used the same lawyer. "The cheater only gets 20% of the joint assets, savings, investments, everything," Carl continued. "There's no provision for personal income or separate accounts. You're both in a strong position. What if Sarah has money I don't know about?" I asked. "Common property only," Carl explained. "Anything you bought together or for the house is up for negotiation, but your homes are protected since they were gifted before marriage. Something like solar panels could be tricky, but Sarah can't touch the house itself. So, because she cheated, she only gets 20%, right?" I asked. I'm fine with giving her that. We'll negotiate the furniture and other stuff. If she wants it, she can pay for moving and storage. Carl grinned. That's the spirit. These are the games we'll play. The important thing is those airtight prenups. Just keep the videos under wraps for now, and don't let them get leaked. If the video somehow goes public, you could face a lawsuit depending on how it was obtained. Kate and I agreed. We had briefly considered sharing the video with friends or family, but we didn't want to risk the fallout on our kids. We were more determined than ever to find out who was behind the recording. We planned to serve the divorce papers on Thursday at noon, but I suggested waiting until Friday afternoon, just to leave them worrying all weekend without a chance to consult their lawyers. Carl talked us out of it. Better to save costs and get them worrying about the financial side of things right away. They'll still be scrambling by the weekend. At first, we wanted to serve them in person just to see their reactions, but Carl advised against it. Instead, we opted to have them served at work, in front of their colleagues, for maximum impact. After leaving Carl's office, we headed to the bank. We moved our money into new accounts, in our names only. We paid off and canceled credit cards, opening fresh ones, making sure we had all the necessary statements. Later that day, I checked my email and found 3 more videos of Sarah and Josh. I thanked the anonymous sender and asked how they got the footage, expressing concern about it going public. A part of me secretly hoped it would leak, but I knew we had to be careful. An hour later, I received another email, this time with an address, 108 Greenfield Lane, apartment 2B. I went there, and by implying some criminal activity, I convinced the building manager to give me details on the tenant. The apartment was rented under Josh's name, through the insurance company he and Sarah worked for. It made me wonder what the company would do if they found out they were unknowingly funding Josh's affair. At 12:30, Sarah called me, furious after being served the divorce papers. I calmly told Sarah that I knew about her affair and that I was setting her free. We had rehearsed this moment over and over, but it still felt surreal. Sarah angrily denied everything, accusing me of believing baseless rumors. She threatened to take everything in the divorce, including full custody of the kids, child support, and half of our assets. She even suggested that Josh could move in with her, while I could shack up with Kate. The thought of them together in my house made my stomach turn. Go ahead, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Get yourself a lawyer. I could barely control the mix of anger and regret. The anger at her stubborn denial and the regret of our marriage falling apart. I just hoped Kate hadn't let too much slip to Josh. Oh, by the way, I added, the girls are packing up your things. Kate told the boys to pack Josh's stuff, too. Everything will be waiting in front of the house this afternoon. We got a restraining order and changed the locks this morning. You'll have to find somewhere else to stay until the court decides. Sarah began screaming, but I hung up before she could get another word in. 10 minutes later, Kate texted me, backyard. Bring your cooler and make sure it's full. I walked over, and she cracked open a beer as I sat down. That idiot, she said, sipping. Josh tried to pin the whole thing on some secretary gossip. I told him Sarah did the same thing, denied it all. He even had the nerve to say we shouldn't believe it. And what did you say? I asked, amused. I told him to pack his stuff and get out, Kate said, laughing bitterly. Told him to call first, too, because I've got a loaded gun. Jake's coming over soon with 2 deputies to make sure things don't get out of hand. I realized how smart that was. Josh could easily provoke me, and I didn't want to end up in jail over an assault charge. I was already in controlled panic mode, just like during an emergency. I'm really glad you talked to the kids earlier, Kate said, more seriously. I wouldn't have been able to do it without breaking down. We had gathered the kids and told them what was happening. Surprisingly, they took it well. Maybe too well. They started packing Sarah and Josh's things without much fuss. Kate thought maybe they were in shock or didn't fully understand how much this would change their lives. My phone beeped with a new email. I wonder if it's from Angry999 again, I said, referring to the anonymous person who had sent the original video. Kate insisted I check. She showed me how to open it, and this time it was an audio file. We listened together. Can you believe Robert and Kate served us? Sarah's voice came through, furious. They must have found out somehow. I can't believe this. Just last night Robert was so affectionate. Relax, Josh's voice replied. They don't know anything. Someone must have gossiped about us having lunch or driving together. We just need to deny everything. If they go through with the divorce, we'll make them pay. I know a lawyer who'll help us. Just don't admit to anything. Assume everything you say is being recorded. When the audio ended, Kate and I sat in stunned silence. Okay, let them think we don't know anything, I said, finally. Josh mentioned they've been planning something for a while. We need to make sure we're protected in case they pull anything illegal. Kate nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. We've got to stay strong. I know, she whispered. Jake says I'm in a better position because the courts usually favor women, but the thought of Sarah getting custody of Alex and Mia and living in your house until they're 18, even with the prenup, it's awful. She could live rent-free while you pay child support. I feel the same way, I said, pulling her into a hug. We'll get through this. We'll come out on top, no matter what, but I wasn't entirely sure. Divorce was all about minimizing the damage. The kids were quiet when Kate and I walked back inside. Mia and Haley were packing up Sarah's clothes, stuffing them into suitcases and plastic garbage bags. I asked them to take pictures of everything, planning to factor the value of those items into Sarah's share of the assets. Next door, Alex and Luke were nearly done packing up Josh's stuff. They weren't even bothering to fold his clothes, just shoving them into bags. I couldn't help but smile when Alex crammed one of Josh's $2,000 suits into a bag like it was trash. The kids had our backs. Sarah texted me, and I called Jake, who showed up with 2 sheriff's deputies. Jake told me to relax. Easier said than done. Sarah and Josh pulled up with an unexpected guest, Buddy LaSalle. Buddy had been the schoolyard bully back in the day, and now he was a big shot around town. He smirked at me as they approached. Hey, Jake, Buddy grinned. Heard you're having some trouble with your wife and brother-in-law. If I had a weapon at that moment, I swear I might have used it. Buddy was huge, and getting into a fight with him wasn't an option. Hey, Buddy, I replied, keeping my cool. We're just trying to work things out. You don't seriously believe my boy Josh is fooling around with your wife, do you? Buddy asked, that same smug grin plastered on his face. That's the story, I said evenly. Jake stepped in closer, sensing the tension rising. Sarah tried to accuse me of cleaning out our bank account. Yeah, I said, and I've got statements showing the original amounts. You'll get what you're owed. She hadn't realized yet that her credit cards were useless now. She'd find out soon enough. Kate and I stayed outside while the deputies escorted Sarah and Josh inside to collect their things. Mia and Haley followed Sarah upstairs, making sure nothing accidentally went missing. Alex and Luke stuck with Josh. Where's my jewelry? Sarah demanded. That had been a sore spot for years. I'd bought her high-end pieces worth at least $25,000, most of it locked away in my safe. I took pictures of her rings and necklaces for insurance purposes. Buddy tried to argue, but he shut up quickly when I explained everything was accounted for. I took photos of the jewelry to ensure nothing went missing. Jake stepped in, suggesting we get a new appraisal of all assets. After a quick consult with Buddy, Sarah reluctantly removed her jewelry and handed it over. Where am I supposed to go now? She snapped, glaring at me. I almost suggested her little love nest on Greenfield Lane but held back. Instead, I just shrugged, realizing that my emotions had shifted. Days ago, I loved this woman. Now, all I felt was cold anger. Sarah and Josh finally left, with Buddy trailing behind. I wondered if they were heading to that apartment. Jake grinned. I hope so. We've got someone following them. If we can prove they're staying there, it'll help us in negotiations. As it turned out, they headed to the Holiday Inn near their office. Cheerfully, I helped them move their stuff inside. I needed to pick up more flash drives anyway, so I could make backups of all the audio and video files. Later that evening, Susan and the girls were cooking dinner when my phone beeped with another email. I headed to the computer, and Susan followed me. Okay, guys, Buddy's voice said in the audio file. Someone's probably tailing Jake. Stay at a motel and get a room with 2 beds. Make sure both beds look used. The investigator can bribe the maid to check. We'll say you're sharing a room to save money. It was embarrassing when my card got declined, Josh said. Good thing I took extra cash. What's next? Sarah asked. I'll call the credit card company and open a new account, Josh replied. Jake's probably snooping around about the jewelry. Make sure any hidden assets are safe. Legally, they're community property, but if Jake and Susan don't know about them, they can't claim them. Just don't hide too much or you'll get caught. Keep any offshore accounts small. Where should we hide the money? Sarah asked. They can find the Baton Rouge accounts, Josh snapped. Forget that. We'll fly to the Cayman Islands and open an account there. Just make sure the room looks lived in. Wet the tissues, ruffle the towels, use the shower and some shampoo. I'll call the office and tell them we're off tomorrow. When the audio ended, Susan let out a sigh. Do they have secret bank accounts? Seems like it, I replied. Where could they have hidden the money? I see all the bank statements. Josh couldn't have stashed much away. I felt uneasy, too. Sarah and I had a travel allowance of $50 a week, and we both reviewed the credit card statements monthly. But now I wondered if Josh had been hiding something more. We decided to leave it for the night and join the kids for dinner. There wasn't much we could do about hidden bank accounts at that moment. The next morning, I drove to Jake's office. I had already arranged for a jewelry appraisal and an estimate of my firearms from a local dealer. Susan met me there after a brief stop at work, and we played the audio files from the previous day for Jake. I'd love to know who's sending these, Jake said, frowning. How did they manage to bug Sarah and Josh at the hotel so quickly? A private investigator wouldn't have had time for this. We might need a judge's order to get their bank account balances, Jake continued. That could mean hiring a forensic accountant. Susan and I shook our heads when Jake asked if we had noticed any significant missing funds. If you want this divorce wrapped up quickly, we'll push forward, Jake said. Next week, we'll meet with Sarah, Josh, and their lawyer to list all assets, then go before a judge. Louisiana's Napoleonic laws make divorce easier, especially with proof of infidelity. Counseling isn't required. Once the judge rules, you wait 6 months and it's over. Jake's phone buzzed. It's Buddy, he said, raising an eyebrow. He's demanding you release an extra 30% of the money you withdrew. I reminded him of the prenup, I said, chuckling. The cheater only gets 20% of joint assets. He demanded proof of infidelity. Huh? Jake grinned. We'll show him in court. I'd love to get an audio tape of him advising Sarah to hide money in offshore accounts and play that for the judge. I had to work that weekend. My head nurse, Sharon, couldn't cover my shifts. What if I start coughing and need a COVID test? I joked. You idiot, Sharon replied affectionately. I can fill in for you. You've got plenty of vacation and sick days saved up. Take an emergency vacation if you need to. Thanks, Sharon. How about I work this weekend and start my vacation on Monday? I suggested. Really? You're a lifesaver, she said. I'll mark you down for sick leave, then vacation. Take as much time as you need. Just keep me updated. Work was a relief, a welcome distraction. Weekends were always busy, and the ICU required constant alertness. But my reprieve was short-lived when I walked in and saw Dr. Preston, my father-in-law, standing at the nurse's station. Hello, Dr. Preston, I said, keeping my voice steady. What brings you to the ICU? Cut the crap, he hissed, motioning me toward the head nurse's office. Once inside, he slammed the door. What's this about you kicking Sarah out? She called her mother, sobbing. John, I said bluntly, I found out Sarah's having an affair with my sister's husband, Josh. I'm dealing with a family crisis. John's face tightened. That's a rumor. Office gossip, he said sharply. They commute together, have lunch sometimes. Sarah told us the rumors about her having an affair with her boss were just that, rumors. I decided to be completely open with him, despite our complicated history. John, I haven't told anyone else except my lawyer and my sister. I haven't even told Sarah and Josh everything I know. I certainly haven't told the kids. I have proof, video and audio. This isn't just a rumor. John looked stunned. What are you going to do? He asked quietly, though I knew he already had an idea. What can I do? I replied, trying to hold back my emotions. I'm trying to protect the kids, but I can't ignore what's happening. John sighed, his eyes filling with tears. If Sarah had proof you were cheating, I'd want your head on a platter. I'd help her bury you. And what about Alex and Mia? I asked. How are they handling it? They're talking more with their cousins than with Susan or me, I said. They're angry with Sarah, but they're holding up, for now. I told them they need to talk to her, but I don't know if they have, I said, rubbing my temples. I'm not getting involved in that mess. I thought you were just overreacting to gossip, Dr. Preston said softly, his voice trailing off. But my first priority is to protect Alex and Mia. I nodded, relieved. And I'll make sure Sarah's physical needs are taken care of, he added. I don't excuse her behavior, but if you have solid proof, I accept it. Stay in touch, Jake. You're an honorable man. With that, he walked out, his shoulders slumped. I felt sorrier for him than for Sarah. When I got home, Susan raised an eyebrow. So he knows his daughter isn't exactly the angel he thought? Huh? Yeah, and we need to tell Mom and Dad soon, I replied. How about tomorrow night, after my shift? We can't have them mad at us for keeping them in the dark. Susan agreed, but the meeting the next night wasn't pleasant. My father only asked one thing, if I had proof. I assured him I did, just like I had with Dr. Preston. He, too, was more concerned about the kids than about us, which I understood. In our family, children came first, and the adults dealt with their own consequences. Kids were protected but informed, so they could learn from mistakes. I received no further updates from my anonymous source, but that was fine. I had more than enough. 4 explicit videos of Sarah and Josh, along with audio recordings proving their long-term affair. But it wasn't just the affair that stung. Sarah had also been financially deceitful. The thought of how she squirreled away enough money to plan a trip to the Cayman Islands enraged me. She was not only unfaithful, but a thief. Jake began digging into their finances, using social security numbers to ensure we could subpoena bank statements if the funds started disappearing. Some questions were answered the following Wednesday when we sat down to list our total assets. A court-appointed financial arbitrator reviewed all the paperwork. I provided my annual salary and Sarah's most recent pay stubs. Sarah made about $5,000 a month, and my salary fluctuated with overtime, but we earned similar amounts annually. Jake said this would likely result in minimal alimony, even without the prenup and the infidelity evidence. On Monday, the auditor requested our income tax returns from the past few years. I found mine easily in our home office, but Susan had to ask her accountant for copies. She was frustrated to discover that Rich hadn't filed the returns with their other documents. She knew he earned around $80,000 annually compared to her $50,000. So Jake assured her she'd probably secure a decent maintenance payment. Buddy showed up to the meeting, flanked by a sullen Josh and Sarah. Sarah shot daggers at me with her eyes, surprising me with her silent anger. I expected some sort of apology, but she remained tight-lipped, no doubt on Buddy's advice. Josh tried hard to keep a neutral expression, but I could see the tension in his jaw. The court officer introduced himself and his assistant, who immediately started taking notes and logging everything electronically. Let's get started, he said. Your attorneys have forms for you to sign, confirming that the statements made today are true and may be submitted as evidence. Our goal is to compile a complete list of all assets and income for the judge's review. We won't discuss prenuptial agreements today, he continued. Regarding car valuations, we'll use the standard Blue Book value. If the car your child drives is registered in your name, we'll consider it separate from community property, as long as both parties agree. We'll get to the financial accounts later. We started with automobiles, firearms, and household goods. That only took a few minutes. Even Sarah's jewelry wasn't an issue. I had it appraised, and its value exceeded that of my truck and guns combined. Buddy insisted that the solar panel system be considered separately, handing over documents stating its value and depreciation. Jake reviewed them, made a few notes, and nodded. Next up were the 401k accounts. I asked why they were included, thinking they should be excluded due to the prenup. They count, Jake explained, since you've been married over 10 years. But in your case, the values are similar, so it's not a major issue. We moved on to the checking and savings accounts. Jake presented statements showing I had withdrawn 80% of the funds, as had Susan and Rich. It's straightforward, said the auditor. But then he paused, turning to Sarah. There's a big discrepancy between Mrs. Preston's salary estimate and her tax returns from the last 2 years. Josh tensed up. I had estimated Sarah earned around $60,000 a year, multiplying her monthly salary by 12. Yes, the assistant said, but for the last 2 years, Mrs. Preston has reported an income of $140,000 annually. I blinked, incredulous. What the hell? I asked, my voice rising. The assistant frowned at me. Didn't you check your tax returns? He asked. I shook my head, explaining that Sarah and Josh's new accountant had handled the taxes electronically. I had only glanced at the small refund we'd received. Sarah's face turned purple with rage. Her salary includes $80,000 in annual bonuses, the assistant explained. I glanced at Buddy, who remained unfazed. And Mr. Jenkins received $110,000 in bonuses annually, the assistant added, turning to Josh. Susan, sitting next to me, asked how much that meant in total. Net? About $80,000 a year, the assistant replied, his expression serious. That totals $160,000. I turned to Sarah, my voice cold. So where's the money, Sarah? Is that why you flew to the Cayman Islands last Friday? To hide it? How did you find out? Sarah snapped, then caught herself and tried to regain composure. Are you following me? I didn't need to, I said, shaking my head. You did it yourself. You and Josh insisted that the kids install phone locator apps. So, when Jason and Mia couldn't reach you on Friday, they used the app to track your location. They saw you disappear near the coast, suggesting you were in the Caymans. Sarah and Josh looked shocked. I continued. They even checked your office on Monday when you weren't home and saw you were in Baton Rouge, probably moving that money into new accounts. I agree, I added. Jake leaned forward, looking at Buddy. We can get the statements to prove the account balances. It's illegal to hide money offshore to avoid splitting joint assets. Your clients flew to the Caymans right after hiring you. Hiding assets like this is a felony. Sarah started crying, and even Josh looked terrified. Buddy's face went pale, then flushed with anger. I didn't do anything like that, he declared, glancing nervously at the recorder and Jacob's assistant, who was busy typing away. Susan spoke up. Jake, can we get them to return the money? Jake nodded. Yes, we'll get our share eventually, even if it means garnishing their paychecks. 80% of those accounts will go to you once infidelity is proven in court. There's no money left. Sarah blurted out, panicking. It disappeared when we tried to transfer it. Josh shot her a warning look, but she kept going. I think you stole it, she accused, turning to me. I stared at her, incredulous. I only recently started suspecting the money was gone, I replied. I had no idea how much was involved. What are you claiming now? Did you spend it all, or did you lose it? Sarah, clearly rattled, explained that they had attempted to transfer the funds electronically while at the bank in Grand Cayman, but the transfer had been denied. When they went to Baton Rouge to investigate, the online statement showed the transfer, but it was missing a routing number or any account details. Give me the bank information for the Baton Rouge account, and I'll investigate, Mr. Jacobs said. I'll get results faster and enter them into the court documents. Josh and Sarah left the room, looking dejected. Susan and I exchanged a glance, wondering where the money had actually gone. I shrugged, sharing her thoughts. Our case was expedited, probably because Sarah and Josh had begged Buddy to hurry things along. They had been staying at the Holiday Inn for a week before moving into the apartment on Greenfield Lane. I couldn't help but smile, imagining them in their love nest, likely struggling with cash flow and Buddy's mounting legal fees. All 5 of our kids insisted on attending the hearing, and I agreed, considering how much they had been affected by the divorce. Jake explained what to expect, and when the day came, we stood as Judge Goody entered the room. He was known for handling family cases in a semi-formal manner, and true to form, he waved for us to sit. I handle family cases in a semi-formal setting, he said. Sit and speak when I address you. If you want to say something, raise your hand. Be respectful. And if you piss me off, I'll throw you out. Understood? The kids had to stifle their laughter at his last comment. Judge Goody glanced at his notes. I've reviewed both cases. Normally, we treat these as separate matters, but the evidence and the parties involved overlap. We have a case where a sibling is accused of infidelity. Now, Infidelity alone isn't grounds for divorce in Louisiana, but prenuptial agreements can affect the distribution of property in such cases. Therefore, I'll need irrefutable evidence of the infidelity first. He continued, there are also discrepancies in the monetary assets, with accusations of hiding funds. My investigation shows that Mrs. Preston and Mr. Jenkins have bank accounts in Baton Rouge with balances of $120,000 and $160,000, respectively. The entire balances were transferred from these accounts on the Monday before the divorce petitions were filed. The correct passwords and security questions were used, indicating that the transfers were made by Mrs. Preston and Mr. Jenkins, or someone they authorized. The judge paused before continuing. Further investigation reveals that the money was split evenly among 5 accounts belonging to their children, Jason and Mia Preston, and Luke, Dave, and Emma Jenkins. These transfers are legal under the Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. The accounts were set up years ago, likely for college or in case of a parent's passing. I was stunned. Why was Sarah making such a fuss if she had transferred the money to the kids? Judge Goody continued, the parents showed responsibility, if not remorse, by giving the money to their children. Such deposits are non-refundable unless fraud is proven. Does anyone have proof of fraud? While I would have preferred to get my 80%, knowing the money was divided among the children was a relief. Josh and Sarah looked like they'd been outsmarted, shocked by the turn of events. When Judge Goody asked if anyone had evidence of fraud, we all shook our heads and answered, "No, Your Honor." It was clear that none of them wanted to risk possible criminal charges for hiding money overseas. Neither Josh nor Sarah appeared willing to challenge the judge's findings. The next matter, Judge Goody said, is the custody of the minor children. My daughter, Mia, raised her hand. Yes, Your Honor, she began. I read that children 15 and older can choose which parent they want to live with. Judge Goody smiled. In some states, yes. But in Louisiana, I take the children's opinions into account after speaking with them privately. Mia stood confidently. I don't need to talk privately, she said. My mother cheated on my father and betrayed our entire family. I want to stay with my dad, Mia declared, standing confidently. Jason quickly followed, agreeing with her, while Luke, Dave, and Emma all stood together, saying they preferred to live with their mom for the same reasons. My heart was racing as I tightened my grip on Susan's hand under the table. Judge Goody gave a small, amused smile. I'll take your wishes into consideration, he said, but we still need to determine if, as you put it, there was any betrayal. Mia raised her hand again, and Judge Goody turned his attention back to her. I also read that a 16-year-old can petition for emancipation, and that at 17, we don't need to petition to leave home, Mia said, her voice calm but direct. The judge nodded. That's an old law, he explained, from the days when young men wanted to enlist in the military without needing their parents' permission. For a 16-year-old to be emancipated, though, they must prove they can support themselves financially. Do you understand? Mia nodded. Yes. I have a college fund, and there's been an additional $56,000 added to it, plus contributions from my parents and grandparents. Emma stood up beside her. Same here. Between all of us, we've got plenty of money to live independently for quite a while. Dave grinned, standing as well. Count me in. We could rent a decent place together. Jason and Rob rose too. If we pool our money, Jason said with confidence, we could easily afford to live on our own. Judge Goody glanced at the 5 standing teenagers, clearly trying to hide a grin. Let me guess, he said, leaning back in his chair. If I don't rule in your favor, you'll all either petition for emancipation or leave home, right? All 5 nodded in unison. Sit down, the judge ordered, raising his hand. I'll think over what you've said. However, before I make a decision, we need to address the accusation of infidelity, which could impact the prenuptial agreements and the distribution of property. Jake stood and addressed the court. Your Honor, I have photographs of Richard Jenkins and Sarah Preston together. Buddy immediately jumped up to object. Anyone can fake a photograph, Your Honor. My son has made pictures of me golfing with the president. It's all Photoshop tricks. The source of this so-called evidence hasn't even been verified. Judge Goody turned to Jake, then glanced at Susan and me. Jake nodded, signaling me to speak up. "Your Honor," I began. "The evidence came from an anonymous tip. I received multiple video and audio files, and I took these screenshots from one of the videos. I also have the full video on both a DVD and a thumb drive." I glanced over at Rich and Sarah, both looking pale and agitated, shaking their heads as if in disbelief. The judge watched them, clearly noting their anxious reactions. "All right," Judge Goody said, raising an eyebrow. "Do we need to play the video Mr. Preston has provided? Or do both parties admit that infidelity has taken place?" Buddy hesitated, clearly wanting to push back, but after a quick, whispered exchange with Sarah and Rich, he relented. "Could we have a moment with my clients, Your Honor?" he asked. After a brief discussion with his clients, Buddy sighed and addressed the judge again. "We concede to the plaintiff's claims." "Very well," Judge Goody replied. "Given that both parties acknowledge infidelity occurred, the prenuptial agreements will stand. Susan and Jake are awarded 80% of the community assets." The judge suggested that we work out the finer details of dividing assets with our attorneys to avoid dragging the court into the specifics. "As for custody," Judge Goody continued, "I grant Jake Preston full custody of Jason and Mia, while Susan Jenkins will have custody of Luke, Dave, and Emma, as requested. Both non-custodial parents will have full visitation rights. Legally, the divorce will be finalized in 6 months. Additionally, due to the increased incomes, Sarah will pay Jake $1,000 per month, and Rich will pay Susan $2,000 per month, both for a period of 3 years. Each child will receive $500 per month until they reach 18. Jake noted that the payments were on the low end and mentioned the possibility of appealing the decision. However, I chose not to pursue it, and Susan followed my lead. After the judge concluded the hearing, we headed out, and Jake informed us that he would arrange a meeting to handle the division of property. I told the kids to head home, change, and get ready for a family meeting. Susan and I made our way to the back of the courtroom, where my father was waiting. "So when did you figure it out, Dad?" I asked, curiosity in my voice. Susan looked at me, confused. "It clicked for me when Mia and Emma made their comments about the video." I explained to Susan. "The anonymous tip from Pissed Off 999? It's something the kids cooked up." Susan's jaw dropped in disbelief. "No," my dad said with a smile. "I actually figured it out a few days ago. Jason and Rob asked me a couple of months back for a credit card to plan something for your anniversary. They promised they'd reimburse me around $500. I didn't think much of it until I saw the statement. There was a purchase from an electronics company. I called them up, and that's when I learned the boys had bought cell phone bugs." I shook my head, stunned. "The kids spent $500 on spy gear?" "Yep," my dad said with a chuckle. "But I still don't know where they got those video cameras from." He followed me home, eager to learn more. As we walked in, all 5 kids were waiting silently in the living room. Their eyes shifted nervously as Susan and I entered. "Kitchen. Now, sit down," I commanded. Susan grabbed a few beers from the fridge, handing one to my dad and another to me. Jason and Rob grinned and held out their hands as if expecting a beer too. "You might be old enough to play spies, but you're not old enough to drink," I said with a smirk. They shrugged, clearly knowing better than to push it. I wasn't furious, just stunned. "All right," I said, looking around the table. "Who wants to explain how all this started?" Mia took a deep breath and began. "It all started when Emma and I dropped by Mom's office one day, and she wasn't there. Neither was Uncle Rich. It was during phase 2 of the COVID lockdown, and we thought maybe we could get some cash from one of them to see a movie. But when we asked the receptionist, she told us they'd both left a long time ago. That was way past lunch, so we decided to track them using the locator Mom insisted on installing on our phones. It showed them at a strange address." Jason leaned forward, continuing the story. "The address led us to an apartment complex. When we got there, we saw Uncle Rich's car in the lot, so we waited. A while later, they came out, holding hands and smiling like nothing was wrong. That's when we knew something was up. For the next few days, we tracked them and saw them going to the same place over and over, always staying for about an hour and a half, sometimes even late at night before they came home. We told the boys," Mia added, glancing at her brothers. Rob picked up the story. "After hearing what they were up to, we did some research. We found bugs you could install on cell phones with a special app. It works like a hidden call, listening to everything happening around the phone without disrupting normal use. It drains the battery faster, but it records all the surrounding conversations. We convinced Grandpa to let us use his credit card to buy them, Jason admitted sheepishly. Sorry, Grandpa. We may have bent the truth a bit. Setting up the bugs and the app was easy, Rob continued. We took turns checking their phones and recording anything important. That's how we got all the audio files. But what about the video? I asked, leaning forward. And how did you figure out which apartment they were using? We checked their keys, Mia said. Both of them had a key with 2011 marked on it. That's not their office number. So we copied the key from Mom's keyring. Jason jumped back in. Once we had the key, we went inside the apartment a few times. That's when we realized we needed cameras to catch everything. So, we bought some small motion-sensitive cameras and a transmitter. Dave's eyes lit up as he explained. The cameras didn't use much battery because they only recorded when there was movement. We hid the receiver under the couch, and it sent the footage straight to us. Pretty cool, right? I looked at the excited kids, realizing they hadn't yet grasped the weight of what they'd done, exposing 2 marriages and breaking apart 2 families. At least, Susan and I were getting answers. So, I said carefully, you recorded Sarah and Rich? Well, you know, and sent me both audio and video files? The kids nodded. They might have been proud of their tech setup, but there was a hesitancy now, a realization of the damage done. Yes, Jason admitted. But there's more. It wasn't just the affair. We found something else in the apartment. Like what? I asked, bracing myself. Mia's expression grew serious. Money, Dad. When Emma and I were snooping around, we realized Mom had stashed things away, clothes, makeup, towels. It was like she was living a double life. We were furious. She wasn't just cheating on you and Aunt Susan. She was cheating all of us. And then, Emma said, jumping in, we found bank account papers hidden in a drawer. They had instructions on how to access them online. It took a bit of searching, but we finally found the accounts. We even peeked into Uncle Rich and Aunt Sarah's offices to dig through their stuff. Wait, I interrupted. You went into their offices? Emma giggled. Yeah, the receptionist let us in to wait for them, so we took a look around. Aunt Sarah had a little notebook in her purse with passwords written in it. The password didn't say secret bank account, but we could tell it was different from the one she used for her phone. Jason smirked. Once we had the passwords, it was only a matter of time before we figured out they were using the same password for both accounts. I shook my head in disbelief. So what did you do next? Well, Jason continued, once we knew what they were up to, we got mad. We thought they might be hiding money from you guys, or even dealing drugs or something shady. Dave was the one who had the idea to move the money. Dave blushed. I just didn't want Dad and Aunt Sarah getting away with it and leaving us with nothing. We'd read about divorce settlements and didn't like the idea of them keeping half the money. We already had accounts set up by Grandpa, so I figured, why not transfer the money into our own accounts? Since we were minors and it was our parents' money, we thought we wouldn't get into serious trouble. Mia looked down, her face tinged with guilt. If we'd known about the 80-20 split in a divorce, we probably wouldn't have taken it. It actually worked out better this way, I said, half relieved, half amazed. You kids then started sending me the video and audio files anonymously, right? Jason nodded. Yeah, we were really angry with Mom and Uncle Rich. We couldn't believe what they were doing to all of us. We didn't want to hurt you and Aunt Susan, but we didn't know what else to do. That's why we sent the video. We tried to get you to come to Grandpa's house a few times because we knew you were upset, and we thought if you were about to pull a gun from the safe, we'd tell you everything. We also moved all the money Mom was hiding, Dave added, looking nervous. I mean, we know we stole it, but they cheated on you, so it seemed fair at the time. I glanced at Susan, who looked completely stunned. She hadn't said a word during the entire conversation, but I could tell she was as amazed as I was. Finally, I managed a small smile. Well, I just hope you kids never decide to get this mad at me or Aunt Susan. I chuckled, shaking my head. Well, if you ever turn on me like you did your mother and Rich, I swear I'll come after you. Even if I need a walker to do it, I said, playfully raising my fist. They all laughed at my mock threat. "You'll never have to worry about that, Dad," Mia said, smiling. "You've never let us down. We stick together. Family first." Dad, who had been quietly listening, furrowed his brow. "One thing I don't quite get," he said. "You bought those cell phone bugs using my credit card, but those cameras you mentioned, they must have cost a fortune. Where'd the money for those come from?" Jason shrugged. "Each camera cost about $500 because they record in full HD with sound, plus they have built-in motion and sound detectors. We got 5 of them. Then we spent another $500 per hidden transmitter to send the signals back to Deer's computer. All in all, it came to about $3,500 with shipping. We can probably return them and get half the money back if they're undamaged," Mia added. "We've already pulled the cameras and the transmitter out. We might be out the cost of the cell phone bugs, though." I raised an eyebrow. "But where'd you get the credit card?" "Oh, we used your Visa," Jason said casually. "I don't have a Visa," I said, frowning. "You do now," Jason admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "I applied for one and forged your signature. It has a $10,000 limit. We bring in the mail every day, so it was easy to hide." At least he was honest enough to admit it. I sighed. "Well, I guess I'm impressed you pulled it off." Mia chimed in. "Cindy and I set up the anonymous email account, Pissed Off 999. Rob came up with the name because he was so mad about what Mom and Uncle Rich were doing." The kids exchanged proud grins as Susan, Dad, and I stared at them in disbelief, equal parts impressed and horrified. "Are the bugs still active on their phones?" I asked, half expecting the worst. Dave nodded. "Yep, they're still running, as long as the phone batteries are charged. We also use the location app, so we always know where they are and what they're up to." He was clearly proud of the operation. "If they're talking on the phone, we can hear it. The app's voice activated, so mostly we hear background noise, car engines, business talk. But we took turns reviewing all the audio files for anything useful." I crossed my arms, trying to stay calm. "All right, I want access to those recordings." Thanks to the kids' covert efforts, Susan and I went into the property division meeting fully aware of what Sarah and Rich were planning to ask for. Sarah was so eager to keep her jewelry that she ended up giving me most of the cash and all the household items without much of a fight. We agreed to some of their other demands, but made sure they had to grovel during the process. Then, in a move that shocked everyone except me, Susan suggested they walk across town with signs on their heads reading, "We cheated on our spouses." If they refused, she said, we'd appeal both the alimony and child support amounts. The look on Buddy's face was priceless. His eyes practically popped out of his head. We overheard Buddy telling Sarah and Rich that they got off easy with the child support payments. He warned them that we were likely to appeal, but Susan eventually relented, making them apologize on their knees instead. I'm not sure exactly how it all played out afterward, but 2 months after the court hearing, word got out that the insurance company Sarah and Rich worked for had discovered that Rich had used company funds to rent their apartment for their affair. It also came to light that, for the past couple of years, Sarah had been getting unusually high premium bonuses, far more than her colleagues. Rich had somehow managed to secure some big bonuses as well. No one could quite figure out how they'd pulled it off. Once the scandal broke, the company quietly fired both Sarah and Rich. They didn't want any publicity, so the whole thing was swept under the rug. None of the video evidence the kids had gathered ever leaked online. Honestly, Susan and I couldn't have cared less if it had. We joked over beers about how it might have been fun to turn them into viral stars, but the kids didn't want to embarrass themselves by going public, and we respected their decision. Since then, Sarah and Rich relocated to New Orleans, where they now work for a small shipping company. They've barely been in touch. They don't visit the kids much anymore, and even phone calls are rare. Last I heard, they're struggling to keep up with their child support and alimony payments. I wish them well. Well, maybe not.